know how I want to be buried. Have you thought about how you want to be buried? In this video, I'm going to talk about different types of burial options we have in the US. As you know, I think it's important we plan this so we don't leave it to our families to have to try to figure this all out. So let's talk about all the different options we have. Number one, the traditional burial. This is an in-ground burial, which is what we've been mostly doing, I'd say, in the past 100 years, where we actually are in a casket and we are buried in a cemetery. Often the body is first embalmed and shown at a funeral and then buried in the casket at a cemetery. That is the traditional burial. There are things like the casket, the gravesite, the plot stone. Do you want like a big stone with your name on it and a saying? Do you want one of those flat stones? You can put pictures on the stones. You know, there's all types of things you can do with the stone, but that's typically what's involved in like the traditional burial process. And the other two things that I don't normally think about with traditional burials are the burial vault and the gravesite preparation and maintenance after the person is buried. The vault is used to support soil that is above and around the casket once buried. Often they're made out of concrete and lined with plastic. I did not know that this was a thing, but after researching this, it's definitely part of the traditional burial. And then the last thing, which again I don't really think about, is the preparation. So the hole being dug, right, prior to the casket going in there, prior to the funeral, and then the maintenance of that plot as time goes on. So again, a lot can go into the burial process, specifically the traditional and the other ones that I'll eventually talk about, but those are the things that we don't normally think about. Hence why it's really important that we learn about this stuff, educate ourselves, and start planning now for what we want in our future. The green burial. Now, I'm going to give you guys a hint. I think this is the kind of burial I would want if I did decide to be buried. Part of me wants to be cremated or just let my family do whatever they want with my body after I die. Cremation to me seems easiest, but if I didn't do that, the green burial is something that's really appealing to me. So let me explain. Green burial is what is referred to as a natural burial. The person who has died has not been embalmed. Sometimes they're like dressed in a shroud. I know I've followed a lot of people on Instagram who show what a green burial is like. And you know, the whole body is dressed in like this white cloth, which is really beautiful, and dressed in flowers. And the body, the natural body without embalming, is laid to be buried. So it's still buried in soil, but it's not in a casket. It hasn't been embalmed. And it is legal, like I said, in all 50 states. A lot of people think it is not because it has gotten some bad press, I could say, because people have said how it might not be good for the earth, good for the soil, good for our water supply. However, this has been found to be untrue from what I read in articles, and it is legal in all 50 states. It just depends on which cemetery you're working with. So some cemeteries will allow it and some won't, but technically it is legal to do in all 50 states. So one thing that people talk about with green burials is that it gives the mourners an inability to see the body, have like a traditional funeral where like the body's laid out in a casket like they do when someone's embalmed, just because the body will not look like it does if it's embalmed. So the mourners miss that part of the funeral where you're like viewing the body and saying goodbye to your loved one. Now, some people, they're okay with that. They don't want that anyway, so it shouldn't be a problem. But that is something people talk about with the green burial. The body is not really truly preserved when it's a green burial, so you don't really have your traditional viewing. The reason why I find the green burial appealing is I like the body being dressed in a white shroud. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but the body is dressed in this, or can be dressed in this white shroud and decorated with flowers. I find it just to be really natural and really beautiful. There's part of that that's like really appealing to me. And I would like, if possible, my family to be involved in possibly dressing me or placing the flowers. To me, it just feels more natural, and I like that. The mausoleum burial. This is associated with more privacy and prestige. Many famous people have mausoleum burials. A mausoleum is a building that memorializes individuals, and they're basically cased and housed in the mausoleum. One thing I didn't know is that when someone is placed in a casket and then placed in a mausoleum, so once this casket is placed in the mausoleum, it'll be dry and clean and preserved for life. There are two different types of mausoleum burials. One's a community mausoleum and one's a private mausoleum. So I know that in the Hollywood Cemetery here in Los Angeles, there are community mausoleums where famous people are laid to rest and people go there and visit that mausoleum, whereas other ones are private and you cannot visit those. The fourth type of burial is called a lawn crypt burial. Have you guys heard of this? I have not until now. Basically, a lawn crypt burial is like a mausoleum, but still gives you the being buried effect. So it is encapsulated and it goes underground. So it's like a traditional burial, but there is a crypt around the casket. The greatest benefit is that it keeps moisture out of the casket. So it preserves the casket better than a traditional burial, but still gives you the effect because it's buried. The home burial. This is what it sounds like. You are buried at home in maybe possibly your backyard or your land, wherever you want to do that. So I think if this is harder and it does vary from state to state, but people are allowed to be buried on their own property if you take the right steps to do so. So this does vary from state to state, city to city. Almost all states allow this. There are some states that do not allow this. California, where I live, is one of those states. And some states have additional requirements like zoning rules, plot distances, things like that. So it is possible, probably much more difficult, but again, if you plan it right and you really want this done, it can be done. And last but not least, burial at sea. Did you guys know you can be buried at sea? I did not know this, and I hate to burst your bubble, but it is actually quite difficult to do. In today's times, most burials at sea are done by people who have been in the Navy. However, anyone can apply to get a burial at sea. So if it's in your heart and that's what you want, you could always try to apply for it and get the details on how to do it. It is a thing. It has been done. So look into it if that sounds good to you. It does not sound good to me because I get seasick and I feel like I'll have eternity with seasickness, and that's the last thing I want to do. It does say the ceremony, so I'm reading here, it does say the ceremony can involve a casket or a sailcloth. I do know because I've watched other videos that people who do get buried at sea, you have to have like a special kind of casket that's going to sink. Otherwise, you're gonna be floating there, which we do not want that. I'm sure there are details upon details about how to make this work, but burial at sea is a thing. Let's talk burial plots. There are 4 types of burial plots. There is the single burial plot. Pretty self-explanatory. That's one person being in one burial plot. Companion plots. Many couples do this. A married couple will go and buy their plots before they have died. Love to see this just because that helps their children know it's already done. And this is when they do 2 plots right next to each other. The double depth plot. Now this also could be bought by families or couples, and it's one plot, but one is deeper than the other. So technically this is a cheaper way to do it because you're not buying 2 plots. You're buying one, but the depth is different. So probably whoever dies first goes in first, then the second one on top of the other. So a way to save money, but still be buried together. And last but not least, family plots. Families buy sections of a cemetery where they know their siblings might be, their cousins, maybe mom and dad in the family. So a mom and dad could purchase a plot of land at the cemetery so they can be buried there, and then their kids after them. And obviously it depends on how much money you want to spend and how big of a plot you want. If you want extended family, it all depends. But I've definitely seen families do this and prepare for this. I love it. I love to see the preparation. It all just depends on what you want. Those are some of the options. I am sure if you Googled all the options, there are other options out there for burials. And of course, I didn't even talk about cremation because that's a different thing. You're not being buried, you're being cremated. But some people do get cremated and then bury their ashes. So it just depends. This is just like, I'm just giving you the standard generalized starting block of what to think about when it comes to planning your funeral, your burial, or what you'd want to do after you die. Get it all planned out so your family doesn't have to. This will help them immensely. So look into it now and see what works for you.